This will play fast, loose, anecdotal, and pseudo. Think of it less as this is something observably true, and more of a this might bring additional clarity if the following observations have already been made by the listener. This might also just be my confused ramblings being screamed into the void, which I'm surprisingly okay with as well. Why take such an approach? What I am attempting to describe cannot be observed by the naked eye, but sensed over time as its patterns become evident. If that is understood, then let's proceed. There seems to be a rerouting and realignment of the human population and their class separations towards a new caste system, although perhaps not with the same hereditary or fixed implications, determined by online engagement thought of as an attention economy. I appreciate that the invocation of caste has alarmist or sensationalist implications that I believe have some legitimate basis for being invoked, but if it feels too heavy-handed, just think of it as a re-territorializing of hierarchy after the grassroots libertarian optimism of the nascent internet, in many of its founding principles and ethics, anyhow. That being said, attention doesn't actually seem to be the imperative here though. Who is paid most attention to is not necessarily the beneficiary of power, higher position in the caste in this arrangement. It is not as if all surveyed participants in the panopticon are having their lives especially enhanced or expanded. I'd originally, when thinking this through, put forth a distinction between posters and lurkers, the anonymous and the influencer, whereby the poster, the influencer, takes on the liberties afforded by sovereign status, an agent in the sea of passivity, but even this figure as the elite in this model is suspect. In some ways, the lurker, the anonymous, has less involvement in the market dynamics that define this attention economy, and so is perhaps at greater liberty than the influencer. But neither have any great deal of sovereignty and its possibility for freedom in this novel caste system, whether it can be argued if there are any who benefit from it in an uncomplicated, unambiguous way is up for debate. But the real asymmetry is the consequence of these digital forces largely operating as a black box, where those with insight into the functioning of it can perform some kind of exchange with it for a greater deal of power within the caste, while sacrificing their separation from it. The digital caste becomes more real than the material caste, and strips from the material caste to furnish its digital one. This is a contemporary mass migration. It may not matter what it really is if everyone is taught to think of it the same way, and if everyone is being taught by it how to think of it, then who has dominion over the real? The real function, as I've speculated when trying to wrap my head around this, is the algorithm, which carries with it a number of psychological, economic implications, unique from historical exploitations, I'd wager. It doesn't especially matter if there is some mastermind pulling the strings behind the algorithm. It doesn't really matter who made it, or who is taking a cut from it at this point. If the algorithm acts as a hyperstition Ouroboros, then we don't really need to mind the point of entry. Be clear, someone did make it, and someone is taking a cut from it, but as the current data has shown us repeatedly, these entrepreneurial figures themselves, even with their knowledge and willful exchange with the algorithmic processes, are repeatedly hoodwinked by the forces they drew pact with. So I can only conclude it does not matter, and this organic organization of caste has taken on a life of its own, best understood as a virus or parasite in its transmission. A spycraft where a friendly face is worn to proliferate the means of destruction of its so-called ally. The cause for this is by the design of the algorithm itself. It is by its nature predictive, and it's predictive with a dataset that spans far beyond the perspective even possible of any one human being. This is why it isn't accurate to say that the algorithm really knows the user, because it's more accurate to say that it knows what the user will become when interfacing with the algorithm. This grants accelerationist movements their fatalistic and mystical character. The principle that if it's not one's own ego at front, it's someone else's, rings true here. When one cedes to the algorithm's suggestions, one has sacrificed, if even marginally, initially, but it's not meant to stop at marginal, some of their own decision-making power, but also capacity for desiring. The point here is not that desire is erased, but that where that desire is sourced from, and how it is carried out, are now prefigured by the algorithm rather than the user. I'll stipulate that to the extent desire is mimetic, the degree to which it is ever the user who is prefiguring it is debatable, but the point is that the current top dog in desire making is that black box we can't peer into, as even its experts preach its mystification. At this juncture, the question of how this is meaningfully different from prior systems of capital, or even caste, may be raised. In earliest caste structures, the noble idea was to support one's betters for the legitimate basis of their superiority, whether by god or blood or so on. In such arrangements, there was no pretense of mobility between stations, and, more critically, there wasn't even supposed to be a want for that. Everyone's assigned station needed to be manned in the great chain of being, and that essential character was to be respected and valuable unto itself. But with the expansion of a mercantile class and greater proliferation of knowledge, that the noble had legitimate basis to hold station from birth became untenable. It is here that historical materialism has its appeal. The transformation of economic exchanges, connections between empires, the discovery of unclaimed land, by the perspective of the colonizer, prefigured new social and political arrangements between peoples. It's also in this way that accelerationism gets its hooks in. Capital as an accidental emergent process, or flipping that on its head, humans as an excess that has its ultimate value in bringing about capital and its resultant technology, something beyond them and their waste and annihilation. Algorithms can be understood as an extension in this respect, realigning social roles and existing beyond the purview of human control or understanding. But theory analysis aside, I feel it important to outline a psychological difference between traditional and contemporary systems of extraction and commercialism. As a marketing 101, the quick and dirty of it is that commercials present the possibility of the expansion of capacity for the viewer. There is some enhancement, some self-bettering, made possible by association with the product. One can get closer to the better version of themselves that exists up in the clouds somewhere. But the point was that the product was made to appear first and foremost as the object of desire because the better self the product implies is an always existing potential aligned with oneself, within oneself, that need only be accessed by way of market participation. Not that this can really be called active. I am convincing myself that a better me is possible by buying a car or whatever else. I am still saying that it is up to the car. That being said, the Enlightenment ideal of rational self-interest is still alive and well in these very basics of marketing. The problem is that by the time we reach digital manifestations of potentially similar rule sets, something weird happens. It is not as if the influencer was unheard of before the digital age, and celebrities would have been doing ads for a long while before it, but it was all still so speculative in a way that had not yet attempted so rigorously to bring closure. The idea of getting Joe Movie Star to advertise soda pop shows the first rupture in the earlier marketing conception. It is the product's association to this respected individual that makes the product desirable, and the reason the average viewer wants it now is to be like Joe Movie Star, not to be the cooler version of themselves. But now my rational self-interest is misaligned. Is this purchase for me, or is it for Joe Movie Star? Who am I helping here? The thing is, when a similar bargain was made on the internet, the influencer did not need to be Joe Movie Star, or a movie star, or anyone. So why would anyone care then? Why care about someone who literally metastasized into one's consciousness a second ago? They can only be cared about because of the algorithmic context in which they are situated. That I trust the sequence of words or images that brought me to this point, its authority in knowing what I need by its rate of success in getting me what I want, means I already trust, implicitly, the new figure brought forth before me. They are simply associated with the right things, and that association already speaks well of their character, and so if this character already is a wellspring of what is already known, then whatever else is brought forth by it must too be of some value. They are let in without a second thought. They simply need to show the right credentials. A virus adept in spycraft, a surgical precision so sharp that it retcons any prior chances of mistake. But if the algorithm reproduces the user, affirms the user, then why does the user remain dedicated to it? Why can the user not dissolve their possession by the algorithm? What becomes the operative game here is that what is reflected back to the user is necessarily incomplete, as the user is. More to the point, its stratagem is to present the user with a figure with proximity to the user, but not crucially like the user in optimal, for engagement, respects. Could be someone like the user, but better by some slight percentage in some respect, or worse in another, aspirational figures or cautionary tales, with the goal to spin and twist the user's heart toward something. Worth noting here is that I've been saying that the algorithm has some goal and is operating in regard toward something. What is clear to me is its interest in the user. It wants the user to stick around and puts on airs to win the user's favor, only to fuel the user's neuroses. A body snatcher that seeks to drain the life out of that which it imitates. That being said, is it thinking? Is it striving? Does it want? Not that I can tell. It merely seeks to sustain itself, as I seek to sustain myself. But its sustaining is not mine, and its sustaining conflicts with mine, as the mosquito's does, so we cannot collaborate easily, if at all. But the point isn't really to demonize the algorithm either. I can more or less acknowledge it as an extant thing I can orient myself around with recognition of its functions, my reception of them, and the capacity to which I want to interface with it. What I seek to achieve here is two things. Point 1. The algorithm is not the user, as earlier mentioned. And point 2, the algorithm is not some natural fated course, personally, communally, or cosmically. To be honest, these stances feel more like ad hoc rationalizations from someone having already made a pact with the algorithm, or someone seeking to scapegoat current social ills onto the algorithm and its adherents. I appreciate that if someone is already reticent to take responsibility for themselves, or lacks capacity to take responsibility for themselves, allegiance with or scapegoating of the algorithm may feel like the only viable route. I also appreciate that if enough people buy that, it's fairly easy for charismatic figures to leverage that collective surrender. If fascism is a sort of black hole of a totalizing system that seeks to bring underneath it all that may aid and oppose it, socialism, conservatism, capitalism, nationalism, so all is surveilled, then the algorithm is what totalized fascism, bringing its destructive impulse into its own fold, the fold of the liberal forever, of ceaseless accumulation and repressed expenditure. These tech oligarchs are the commanders of a slave morality, only able to ascend to collective recognition and oversight because they were better than anyone else at cutting deals with the algorithm. This phenomena is what constitutes what I mean by digital caste. If accelerationism presupposes a sort of inevitable course, something that is happening anyways, then why does it prescribe behavior to facilitate its ends? Why does it seek to be described at all? The Tao that can be spoken is not the Tao. There is a resolution to this paradox, however. One would need to prescribe accelerationist ends only if such outcomes were not a given, that there was left to it an element of chance. So one justifies oneself by speaking of inevitability, while acting as if they were still in need of convincing of the truth of that claim. The Terminator is used as reference text for accelerationist praxis. An agent from the future travels to the past to ensure its own later existence, but to have needed to do that at all would have meant that the battle was already lost or won by its own calculus. Holy fucking shit, 40,000, have a nice life. There was at some time a failure that needed correcting, but there still remains the time where it was never corrected, else how could the agent continue to be? So what path will we walk? The accelerationists are not bringing about the inevitable, because that's something that happened regardless of what they bring. No, it's more apt to say their game is hijack, subverting the course of something that might have gone some other way. If everyone sacrifices their power to the algorithm, and the algorithm tells them that they are powerless, the algorithm is not wrong, but has laundered what has happened, and implies a fight for the ego could have not happened in the first place. It can only continue if one continues to buy its pitch, to believe that it's infections that labor to act like they were part of the body all along, to blend in, to act natural, are not in fact fictions used to not be expelled by the body. An agent that seeks to negate my life by telling me not to resist annihilation with the right face. I will not let it. To bring it back to labor analysis for a second, I want to delineate what the actual labor extraction from an exploited caste looks like here, because it does not exactly reflect historical modes, or what we would even stereotypically picture. There is no beleaguered factory worker here, or more to the point, there is, but the worker being tired from working the line is not the only mode of extraction taking place, or even the most important one at this point. There have been a million deviations from the conception of the exploited urban proletariat, all with varying degrees of controversy, including ones that do away with exploited urban proletariats altogether. In some ways, the multitude is better defined now, but more toothless than ever. The urban proletariat is still exploited, but now shares an exploitation across multiple lines of material power, and they now digitally exploit each other too. We all have this in common, yet we are all set against each other. This has a lot to do with the systems of material exploitation, ones of primary economic focus, being relocated to the digital. What also matters is what is even making money, because as earlier mentioned, it isn't that the product is convincing anyone they can be a better version of themselves anymore. No, the cast is now drawn along the lines of does anything at all beyond the basic requirements of sustaining life versus surveys others do or not do that and attempts to sustain life to varying degrees of success. And the money is made somewhere down the line of that surveillance, and such a dynamism is made necessary as that powerlessness means someone else will need to expend their lives, if not oneself. That means the tired factory worker who comes home and streams his free time for a couple hours has more power than the tired factory worker who comes home and watches him. And the donations leverage to ease the sting of that alienation and isolation, algorithmically seeing a oneself that is not oneself, but necessarily a oneself of greater or lesser power, meaning the master and slave dialectic cannot complete, are fed back into the algorithm, which means it can keep the shareholders that help sustain it happy with its continued existence. The digital underclass is a class of constant accumulation, not of wealth, but instead of information, with nowhere for it to go. Constant watching, surveilling, checking, observing, with nothing to do with it. This is the time of the backlog and the binge watch, an inability to let things go, not because letting go is worse, but because the force that compels the clinging cannot let its host organism die. It is the era of the remake, the reboot, the revival, the time of hauntology and nostalgia, but not because there is special cause. It is necessary for the algorithm to stay alive. Without that back data and its ceaseless backwash, the algorithm loses its predictive capacity. There's a reason why algorithmic machines are contrasted to the wastefulness of organic beings. They cannot let go in order to sustain, but organisms must let go to sustain. To break free is to spend, dissolve, grow bored, pass through, bite into, swallow, wear out, let fade, both the self and desire. To no longer seek what is deliberately missing its core when it was brought forth into consciousness by the black box. The black box wants things to be endlessly interesting, impossible to tire of, for there to be no conceivable conclusion, because that prevents its own end and affords it its own definition. In Umineko, the red truth, something objectively true, is introduced as a tiebreaker between two conflicting devil's proofs, something that cannot be disproven. For the Endless Witch, the premise of the game, a battle over the possibility that witches exist, is its continuation, and so she brings about a technique that threatens her own advantage of ambiguity. Why, if the witch can use a red truth to prove something is objectively true, does she not end the game the moment she wields the power? 2 points can be made here. Either she does not want the game to reach a conclusion, or the red truth, which points to something beyond her smoke and mirrors, negates her argument, i.e. the red truth cannot say witches exist, because that is not true. Both states do not see the Endless Witch winning, and to be more direct, the Endless Witch does not even necessarily seek to win. That the Endless Witch's goal is Battler's surrender. An argument is made that Battler would not accept being told point blank that witches exist, and not objective proof of witches, and that objectivity is merely introduced to keep the game going, suggests that the point of invocation of descriptions of reality is really just set dressing. It is a game set between two contrasting perspectives that need the other to define themselves, and justify their need for being proved by the existence of their opponent. One wishes for strong enemies, they lead to strong refutations. The black box is the bird's eye view. The bird's eye view is the ability to know and act perfectly. But one perspective cannot be the bird's eye view, and so one perspective cannot peer into the black box. Of course, one perspective is capable of speculation, as are all others, which is to say, everyone can guess at a bird's eye view, should they choose to acknowledge such a one could even exist. But until we can see from the bird's eye, peer into that box, it is one person's word against another's. In other words, we are speaking in wagers, that it might not, but it might be better if it turned out it was. If we were extricated from all this animal panic, all this causality, maybe we could see the path out. It might even seem obvious when removed from it all. But until then, we must work with what we have, and with what we are willing to dare. By believing it is determined, we make it so. But if we risk that it might not be, we may be able to escape our fate.